The last thing my mother threw at me before I walked out the front door was a glass candle holder. It shattered against the wall inches from my head. "You are uneducated trash," she screamed so loudly the veins in her neck bulged, 32 years old and still acting like some lost little soldier girl. My father stood behind her near the dining room table, red-faced and breathing hard. "Get out of my house," he barked, pointing toward the front door with a trembling finger. "You hear me? Get out, you lowlife." The room smelled like burnt pot roast and cheap red wine. My younger brother Ryan sat there in silence, pretending to look uncomfortable, but I caught the tiny smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. That was the moment I realized something that should have become obvious years earlier. They didn't hate me because I failed. They hated me because I survived without them. I picked up my duffel bag from beside the stairs. No yelling, no tears, no dramatic speech. I just looked at my mother and quietly said, "Okay." None of them tried to stop me. And none of them had any idea that less than 24 hours later I would wake up inside my oceanfront house in Malibu. 3 weeks later they would be begging to walk through my front gate. But that night in Texas, as thunder rattled the windows above our old family dining room, all they saw was the daughter they thought they had finally broken. The funny thing about people like my parents is this: they mistake silence for weakness every single time. I grew up in a narrow 2-story house outside Galveston, where appearances mattered more than truth. My mother kept plastic covers on the furniture for guests we almost never had. My father ironed his jeans every Sunday morning before church. Everything in our house revolved around pretending we were better than everybody else. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, we were drowning in debt, resentment, and disappointment. Mostly disappointment, especially when it came to me. Ryan had always been the golden child. He had perfect hair, perfect teeth, and the kind of confidence people mistake for intelligence. My parents adored him from the moment he learned how to charm adults into laughing at his little jokes. I was different. Quiet, observant, restless. While Ryan talked, I listened. While Ryan spent money, I saved it. And while Ryan spent his 20s hopping between fake business ideas and luxury apartments he couldn't afford, I was halfway across the world wearing combat boots in places most Americans couldn't find on a map. My mother hated the military from the day I enlisted. "You're too smart to throw your life away," she had said back then. But what she really meant was, "You're embarrassing me." Because military service didn't fit the image she wanted to show her friends at church. A daughter in uniform wasn't impressive to her. A daughter with a law degree would have been. Or a husband with money. Or grandchildren she could parade around Facebook. Instead, she got me. Captain Emily Carter. Logistics officer, Army veteran, single, controlled, independent. Everything my mother secretly resented in women. I had just returned from overseas deployment 2 weeks earlier when my father called, insisting I come home for a family dinner. His voice had that tight edge people use when they're pretending something isn't wrong. I almost didn't go. I should have trusted my instincts. The dinner started tense and got worse fast. Ryan arrived 40 minutes late wearing a designer blazer with the tags practically still attached. He kissed my mother on the cheek and tossed his BMW keys on the counter like he owned the place. "You still driving that truck?" he asked me while pouring wine. "It runs." He laughed. "Jesus, Emily, you make Army officer money and still live like a mechanic." I ignored him. That annoyed him more. My father carved the roast with unnecessary aggression while my mother kept glancing at me with that look she always got before criticizing something. My haircut, my posture, my life. Then finally, halfway through dinner, my father cleared his throat. Ryan's company hit a rough patch. I almost smiled. Ryan had been hitting rough patches for 15 years. "What kind of rough patch?" I asked calmly. Ryan leaned back in his chair. "Temporary cash flow issue." "Meaning?" My mother jumped in quickly. "He just needs help getting through this quarter." I set my fork down. There it was. The real reason I'd been invited. "How much?" Nobody answered immediately. That told me everything. Finally, Ryan muttered 80,000. I actually laughed under my breath. My father slammed his hand on the table. "This isn't funny." "No," I said quietly, "it really isn't." My mother folded her arms. "Family helps family." "I already helped Ryan," I replied, 3 years ago, and 5 years before that. "This is different." They always say that. Ryan's expression hardened. You think you're better than everybody because you wear a uniform. No, I said evenly, I think responsibility matters. The silence after that turned sharp. Dangerous. Then my father said something that made my stomach slowly turn cold. We took loans out to help you too. I frowned. What loans? Nobody looked at me. My mother stared down into her wine glass. Ryan suddenly became very interested in his phone. And then the truth landed. You used my name, I said. Still silence. My pulse slowed instead of rising. That always happened when I got angry. Military training had rewired me that way. How much, I asked again. My father rubbed his forehead. 42,000. I stared at him. Not because of the money. Because of how casually he admitted it. You committed fraud. Oh, please, my mother snapped. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic, I repeated softly. You were never using your credit anyway, she continued. And it was for family. I looked around that table and realized something painful. Nobody there thought they had done anything wrong. Not one of them. Ryan leaned forward. Look, if you just refinance the Malibu property. I froze. Very slightly. But my mother noticed. The room went still. What Malibu property? She asked slowly. Damn. Ryan blinked. Wait, she didn't tell you. I closed my eyes briefly. Of course he knew. A mutual acquaintance from Houston must have mentioned it months ago. My father stared at me. You own property in Malibu. I said nothing. My mother's face twisted instantly. You've been hiding money from this family. Hiding? I almost laughed. You threw me out emotionally years ago. Oh, don't start acting like some victim, she snapped. Then came the explosion. Years of resentment, envy, bitterness. You think wearing a uniform makes you classy? My mother shouted. You're still the same trailer trash little girl who ran away because she couldn't handle real life. My father stood up so suddenly his chair scraped hard against the floor. Get out of my house. I looked at him for a long moment. Then at my mother. Then at Ryan. And in that instant something inside me became perfectly calm. Not numb. Free. I stood slowly, picked up my duffel bag near the staircase, and walked toward the front door. My mother yelled after me, "Fine, run away again." I paused with my hand on the doorknob. Without turning around, I said quietly, "No, this time I'm leaving." Then I stepped outside into the warm Texas rain. I sat inside my truck for almost a full minute, listening to the storm hammer the windshield. My hands rested calmly on the steering wheel. No shaking. No crying. Just silence. Then I picked up my phone and called a number saved under one word. Marcus. He answered immediately. You okay? I looked back once at the glowing windows of my parents' house. Then I started the engine. Prepare the Malibu property, I said. I'm coming home tomorrow. The Pacific Ocean looked nothing like Texas. That was the first thought that crossed my mind the morning after my parents threw me out. In Texas, the water always felt heavy somehow. Brownish, humid, thick with storms and memory. But Malibu was different. The ocean outside my bedroom windows looked endless and silver beneath the early morning sun, like somebody had stretched liquid glass all the way to the horizon. I stood barefoot on the polished concrete floor, holding a cup of black coffee, listening to waves roll softly beneath the cliffs below my property. No yelling. No slammed doors. No tension sitting in my chest like a brick. Just silence. The kind of silence people spend their entire lives trying to afford. My beach house sat tucked along a private stretch of coastline north of Carbon Beach. Clean lines, floor-to-ceiling windows, warm cedar walls, minimalist furniture, nothing flashy. No gold statues or giant marble fountains like the rich people my mother admired online. Everything in the house had been chosen for one reason only: peace. The irony would have made my father furious. He spent 30 years trying to convince everyone around him that success looked loud. Meanwhile, the happiest moment of my life was standing alone in a quiet kitchen wearing sweatpants, while ocean wind drifted through an open glass door. I walked onto the balcony and leaned against the railing. The air smelled like salt and eucalyptus. Somewhere down the shoreline, gulls screamed over the surf. For the first time in years, I could hear my own thoughts clearly. And honestly, that scared me a little. Because once the noise disappears, you can no longer lie to yourself about what hurts. I hadn't slept much the night before. The drive from Texas to California gave me too much time to think, too much time to replay my mother's face twisted with rage. Uneducated trash. Funny thing was, I used to believe her. Not the exact words maybe, but the feeling behind them. I spent most of my childhood believing I was somehow less valuable because I didn't fit the image my family wanted. Ryan was polished, social, charming. He knew how to make people feel important in conversations. My parents loved that. I asked too many questions. I noticed too much. And worst of all, I refused to depend on them. That becomes a problem in toxic families. Independence feels like betrayal to people who need control. My phone buzzed softly against the kitchen counter. Marcus. I smiled faintly before answering. You alive? He asked. Barely. That bad. I looked out toward the ocean again. My mother threw a candle holder at my head. There was a long pause. Okay, he said slowly. So we've officially crossed into criminal territory. That made me laugh for the first time in days. Marcus Reed had been my closest friend since Afghanistan. Former Army Ranger, 6'3". Calm until he wasn't. He now ran a private security consulting company in San Diego and somehow managed to look intimidating even while drinking green juice. You at the house? He asked. Yeah. And I glanced around the room. Morning sunlight spilled across pale wood floors. My deployment shadow box hung near the hallway beside framed military commendations I never talked about. Beyond the glass walls, the ocean stretched endlessly beneath the cliffs. And it finally feels like mine, I said quietly. Marcus understood what I meant immediately. Not the house. The life. Around noon, I finally unpacked my duffel bag upstairs. Most people would have expected someone with money to own endless expensive things, but deployment changes your relationship with possessions. After years of living out of military bags and temporary quarters, luxury stopped meaning more. Luxury became stability, control, safety. I hung my uniforms carefully inside the walk-in closet and paused briefly when I saw my dress blues hanging near the back wall, pressed perfectly, medals aligned. My mother once told me uniforms only looked impressive to poor people. Meanwhile, the men I served beside would have died for each other without hesitation. Funny how character works. I showered, changed clothes, and spent the afternoon reviewing documents in my home office overlooking the water. Most people, including my parents, had no idea where my money came from. They assumed military salary couldn't possibly explain Malibu property. Technically, they were right. The real money came from investments. Years earlier, during deployment overseas, I got tired of watching officers twice my age destroy their finances with lifted trucks, divorces, and ego purchases. So instead, I studied real estate during every free hour I had. Podcasts, books, market reports. While Ryan was leasing luxury cars to impress strangers, I was quietly buying distressed duplexes near military bases through veteran housing programs. One property became two. Two became six. Then came partnerships. Then short-term rentals. Then commercial contracts through a veteran-owned logistics company Marcus helped build. Nothing happened overnight. That's the part people hate hearing. Success is usually boring while it's happening. Slow decisions, quiet sacrifices, delayed gratification. Things Ryan physically could not tolerate. My parents never asked how I lived. Only why I wasn't living the way they wanted. By sunset, I sat outside wrapped in a blanket while the sky turned orange above the Pacific. The crashing waves below sounded almost hypnotic. And for the first time in a long while, I let myself remember. I remembered being 19 years old standing in the recruiter's office because I couldn't afford college without drowning in debt. I remembered my father calling me selfish for leaving home. I remembered my mother refusing to attend my military graduation because she didn't support violence. But she supported humiliation just fine. The strange thing about emotionally abusive families is that they train you to confuse survival with love. You keep trying harder because you think eventually they'll become the people you needed. They almost never do. My phone buzzed again around 8 that night. Dad. I stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. Then another call. Dad again. Voicemail. I didn't listen. A minute later came a text. We need to talk, it's serious. I deleted it. Then came another one from my mother. Family doesn't abandon each other. That one almost made me laugh. 3 weeks passed. 3 peaceful, quiet weeks. I worked remotely from Malibu, trained every morning, met Marcus twice for dinner, and slowly began feeling something unfamiliar inside my own body. Rest. No criticism, no guilt, no constant emotional ambush waiting around corners. Then one Thursday afternoon, everything changed again. I had just returned from a morning run along the beach when my phone rang from an unknown number. Normally I ignored those. Something made me answer anyway. Captain Emily Carter, a male voice asked formally. Yes. My name is Daniel Whitmore. I'm an attorney representing Gulf Coast Community Bank regarding several outstanding financial matters connected to your family. I stopped walking. The ocean wind suddenly felt colder. What kind of financial matters? There was a pause. Then he said carefully, Ma'am, are you aware your parents listed you as a guarantor on multiple business loans connected to Ryan Carter Enterprises? I closed my eyes slowly. And in that exact moment I realized the nightmare wasn't over. It was just beginning. The attorney's voice stayed calm while my entire body went cold. Ma'am, he continued carefully, the bank has been attempting to contact your family for several weeks regarding missed payments and possible fraud exposure. Fraud exposure. Those 2 words settled into my chest like stones. I walked slowly across the deck overlooking the ocean while he explained the details. Ryan's company wasn't just failing, it had been collapsing for nearly 2 years. Fake revenue reports, unpaid payroll taxes, inflated investor statements, personal spending hidden as business expenses. Classic desperation disguised as entrepreneurship. And somehow buried inside stacks of forged documents and loan paperwork, my name appeared repeatedly. My parents had signed things on my behalf. Again. Only this time the numbers weren't $40,000. They were well into 6 figures. By the time the call ended, the sun had disappeared behind a wall of gray clouds rolling over the Pacific. I stood there gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles hurt. Not because I was panicking. Because deep down, I wasn't surprised. That was the worst part. Children from families like mine develop a strange instinct. You spend years anticipating disaster before it arrives. Eventually, betrayal stops shocking you. It only confirms what your nervous system already knew. I went inside and poured myself another cup of coffee, even though it was nearly 6 in the evening. The house suddenly felt too quiet again, but not peaceful this time. Heavy. Like the calm before a wildfire. My phone buzzed. Mom. Then immediately, Dad. Then Ryan. I ignored all 3. A minute later, another voicemail notification appeared. Then another. Then another. I sat at the kitchen island staring at the screen while the Pacific darkened outside the windows. Finally, I pressed play. My mother's voice filled the room instantly, already crying. Emily, sweetheart, please call us back. There's been some misunderstanding with the bank. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof and Ryan is trying to fix everything, but her voice cracked dramatically. Families help each other. Please don't punish us over one argument. One argument. I almost admired the audacity. My father's voicemail came next. You need to stop ignoring us and act like an adult, he snapped immediately. No apology, no accountability. This situation could affect all of us if you don't cooperate. Then Ryan's message. Surprisingly calm. Look, Em, things got complicated. But honestly, if you help us clean this up, everybody walks away fine. You've got the money. I deleted all 3 voicemails without responding. Then I walked upstairs, opened the sliding glass doors in my bedroom, and sat on the floor listening to the ocean below. That night I barely slept. Not because of the money. Money could be handled. But because I finally understood something painful with complete clarity. My family never saw boundaries as real. To them, love meant access. Access to my time, my loyalty, my finances, my emotional energy. And the moment I stopped giving those things freely, I became the villain. The next morning I met Marcus for breakfast at a small cafe overlooking the marina in Santa Monica. He showed up wearing jean sunglasses and the expression of a man already prepared to threaten somebody on my behalf. You look terrible, he said after sitting down. Good morning to you too. He leaned back. How bad is it? I explained everything quietly while waiters moved around us carrying coffee and plates of eggs nobody seemed emotionally stable enough to enjoy. Marcus listened without interrupting. When I finished, he rubbed his jaw slowly. "So your parents committed identity fraud," he said flatly. "Yes. And your brother's probably going to prison." "Possibly. And somehow you're still calmer than everybody else." I stared out toward the boats rocking gently in the harbor. I learned a long time ago that panic wastes energy. Marcus studied me for a moment. "You know they're going to come after you now." "I know. They think you'll save them." I gave a tired smile. "That's the family tradition." His expression softened slightly then. "You don't owe them your life, Emily." Those words stayed with me the rest of the day. Because logically I already knew that. Emotionally was harder. Children raised by manipulative parents carry guilt like muscle memory. Even after years of distance, part of you still feels responsible for their suffering. That conditioning doesn't disappear overnight. 3 days later, I came home from an early workout and nearly froze when I saw a black sedan parked outside the security gate near the bottom driveway. A man stood beside it. Tall, broad shoulders, gray button-down shirt wrinkled from travel. My father. For a second, neither of us moved. Ocean wind whipped through the palm trees lining the property while waves crashed below the cliffs. He looked smaller somehow. Older. Not weak exactly, just diminished. Then his eyes lifted toward the house behind me. The glass walls. The infinity edge balcony. The expensive architecture stretching across the bluff above the ocean. I watched the exact moment realization hit him. His daughter really lived here. Not rented. Owned. The security guard near the gate stepped closer to him cautiously. "Sir, you can't remain here without authorization." My father barely heard him. "This is your house?" he asked me quietly. I folded my arms. Yes. His eyes moved across the property again. There was confusion there now, and something else. Humiliation. Because men like my father build their entire identities around being providers, authority figures, the center of the family structure. Standing outside my gate, he suddenly looked like a man realizing the daughter he dismissed had surpassed him years ago. "You never told us," he muttered. "You never asked." Silence stretched between us. Then finally he sighed heavily and stepped closer to the gate. "Emily, your mother could lose the house." There it was. Not "I'm sorry." Not "we were wrong." Just need. Always need. I looked at him carefully, really looked. This man taught me how to ride a bike, how to throw a baseball, how to parallel park. He used to carry me on his shoulders during county fairs when I was too tired to walk. And somehow over the years love between us had turned into transaction. "You used my identity," I said quietly. "We were trying to help Ryan." "You destroyed my credit." "We thought he could recover." I shook my head slowly. "You gambled with my life." His jaw tightened. "Families make sacrifices." "No," I said calmly. "Healthy families ask permission." That hit him harder than yelling would have. For a moment he looked away toward the ocean. Then he said softly, "If you don't help us, your mother loses everything." Something inside me finally settled then. Not anger. Acceptance. I stepped closer to the gate and met his eyes directly. She already lost me. Then I turned around and walked back toward the house while the waves crashed endlessly below the cliffs. And for the first time in my life, I didn't look back. A week after my father showed up outside my gate, my Aunt Diane called and asked if I would come to my grandmother's 78th birthday dinner. I almost said no immediately. Family gatherings in my family were never really gatherings. They were performance arenas. Everybody arrived carrying invisible scripts. My mother played the exhausted martyr. My father played the hard-working patriarch. Ryan played the misunderstood genius entrepreneur. And me. I was usually cast as the difficult daughter who pulled away from the family. But Aunt Diane had always been different. She was my mother's older sister, divorced twice, emotionally blunt, and completely uninterested in pretending people were nicer than they actually were. She once told me over margaritas, "Your mother has spent 30 years competing with every woman she meets, including her own daughter." At the time I laughed. Later I realized she was right. "She really wants you there," Diane said gently over the phone. "Your grandmother asks about you constantly." That made it harder. Because Grandma Evelyn never treated me like a disappointment. Even when I enlisted, she hugged me tighter than anybody else and whispered, "Go build your own life before this family tells you who you are." I should have listened sooner. So 3 nights later, I drove down to a private restaurant in Houston where Diane had reserved a back dining room for the birthday dinner. The valet opened my car door as warm evening air wrapped around the parking lot. I adjusted the sleeves of my cream-colored blazer and glanced briefly at my reflection in the window. Calm. Controlled. That was the armor now. Not uniforms. Inside, soft jazz drifted through the restaurant, while low, amber lighting reflected off polished wine glasses. Conversations echoed softly through the private room near the back. And the second I walked in, the room went silent. It happened almost physically. Forks paused mid-air. Conversation stopped. Even Ryan blinked. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't entering the room looking like somebody trying to earn acceptance. I looked like somebody who no longer needed it. My grandmother smiled first. There she is. I crossed the room immediately and bent down to kiss her cheek. She squeezed my hand tightly. "You look peaceful," she whispered. That nearly broke my heart. Nobody had ever described me that way before. Then came the awkward part. My mother sat stiffly near the center of the table wearing an expensive navy dress that probably should have been returned after purchase. My father looked exhausted, truly exhausted. Gray shadows hung beneath his eyes. Ryan, meanwhile, still somehow managed to look arrogant despite clearly unraveling. His smile tightened when he looked at me. "Well," he said lightly, "guess government work finally paid off." A few relatives laughed nervously. I took my seat calmly across from him. Discipline usually does. His jaw flexed slightly. Good. For years I had stayed quiet just to keep peace inside rooms like this. But silence in dysfunctional families becomes permission. Eventually, people mistake your restraint for surrender. Dinner began awkwardly. Waiters poured wine while relatives carefully avoided discussing the obvious disaster surrounding my parents and Ryan. Everybody in the family had heard rumors by now. Lawsuits, investigations, debt. Texas families gossip the way soldiers clean rifles. Routinely and with precision. My mother barely looked at me during the appetizers. Then finally, halfway through dinner, she cleared her throat dramatically. "We've all been under a lot of stress lately." There it was. The opening statement. Nobody responded. She forced a smile. Families go through difficult seasons. Ryan took a sip of whiskey beside her. Some people just disappear when things get hard. I looked directly at him. Some people create the hard things. Silence. Sharp this time. My father rubbed his forehead slowly. "Emily?" "No," Ryan interrupted suddenly. "Let's talk honestly for once." I almost laughed. Honesty terrified him. He leaned back in his chair, trying to regain control of the room through confidence like he always did. "You act like you're so much better than everybody here because you bought a fancy house." I never said that. "You didn't have to." I watched him carefully. His hands trembled slightly near his glass. Interesting. Fear was finally cracking through the performance. Then he smirked. "You got lucky with investments. Congratulations." Lucky. That word again. People love calling disciplined women lucky because acknowledging effort would force them to confront their own excuses. I folded my napkin carefully onto the table. "You leased a Maserati with investor money," I said calmly. Ryan froze. The entire table went still. "You expensed nightclub bills as corporate development," I continued, "and you told investors your company had contracts that didn't exist." Emily, my mother, snapped immediately. But I wasn't finished. "You borrowed money from relatives while posting fake vacation photos online pretending you were successful." Ryan's face darkened instantly. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know the IRS does." My Aunt Diane nearly choked on her wine. My father looked physically ill. And for the first time in years, the family mask finally started slipping off the table. Ryan leaned forward aggressively. "You think humiliating me makes you special?" "No," I replied quietly. "I think consequences exist." That sentence landed like a grenade. Because everybody at that table knew the truth. Ryan had spent his entire life escaping consequences. Late rent payments fixed by Dad. Credit card debt erased by Mom. Broken promises laughed away because he's figuring things out. Meanwhile, I got criticized for everything. Everything. Too emotional. Too distant. Too ambitious. Too independent. My mother suddenly slammed her wine glass onto the table hard enough to rattle silverware. After everything we sacrificed for you. I turned toward her slowly, and something inside me finally opened. Not rage. Truth. You didn't sacrifice for me, I said quietly. The room fell completely silent. You sacrificed me. My mother's face went pale. I could actually see the shock hit her. Because deep down, narcissistic parents never expect their children to say the quiet part out loud in public. So I kept going. You taught me my worth depended on usefulness, I said steadily. You loved me when I solved problems, when I stayed quiet, when I gave things away. Nobody moved. Nobody even picked up a fork. But the second I stopped letting this family use me, I looked directly at my father. Now I became trash. My father lowered his eyes. Ryan scoffed loudly, but it sounded weak now, defensive. And suddenly the room felt different. Because everybody could see it. Not the successful military officer. Not the Malibu house. The emotional imbalance. The scapegoat dynamic. The years of quiet damage nobody wanted to name. Then my grandmother spoke softly from the end of the table. Enough. Everybody looked toward her. Her fragile hands rested calmly atop her cane while her eyes locked onto my mother. She was never the problem, Grandma Evelyn said quietly. My mother's lips parted slightly. No words came out. And for the first time in my entire life, nobody rushed to defend her. Dinner ended shortly afterward in awkward fragments. Chairs scraped. Conversations broke apart. People avoided eye contact. As I prepared to leave, my grandmother reached for my hand. Her skin felt paper-thin and warm. You built a beautiful life, she whispered. Don't let guilty people make you ashamed of it. Emotion caught unexpectedly in my throat. I kissed her forehead gently. Then I walked out of the restaurant alone beneath the warm Houston night sky. Behind me, inside that private dining room, my family was finally sitting with something they had avoided for years. The truth. By early December, my parents lost the house. Not dramatically. No police cars. No furniture thrown onto the lawn. Real financial collapse is usually quieter than people imagine. A few certified letters, missed deadlines, bank meetings. Then one morning the locks simply belonged to somebody else. I heard about it from Aunt Diane. They moved into an apartment outside Pasadena, she told me gently over the phone. Small place. Ryan's gone. Gone where nobody knows. That didn't surprise me either. Men like Ryan disappear the moment consequences become real. The investigation into his company kept growing. Federal tax issues, investor complaints, civil lawsuits. Last I heard, he'd bounced between Florida and Nevada trying to convince people he was launching something new. Some people spend their entire lives running from themselves. Meanwhile, life in Malibu became quieter in the best possible way. I got promoted that winter. The ceremony took place on base beneath a cold blue California sky, while younger officers stood lined in formation nearby. Marcus attended wearing a suit that somehow still made him look military. Aunt Diane came too. So did my grandmother, despite insisting the wheelchair made her look dramatic. When they pinned my new rank onto my uniform, I felt something unexpected settle inside me. Not pride exactly. Permission. Permission to stop apologizing for surviving. After the ceremony, a young female lieutenant approached me nervously near the parking lot. "Ma'am," she said, adjusting her cap, "I just wanted to say, hearing some of your story helped me." I smiled faintly. "Which part? The part where you stopped trying to earn love from people committed to misunderstanding you. That stayed with me for days. Because she understood something important most people learn too late. You can spend your entire life performing loyalty for people who already decided not to value you, and no amount of sacrifice changes their decision." A week before Christmas, rain rolled across Malibu for 3 straight days. The ocean turned steel gray beneath heavy clouds, while wind rattled the glass walls of my house at night. I liked storms now. They reminded me that chaos could pass without destroying everything. That Thursday evening, I sat wrapped in a blanket near the fireplace reviewing paperwork when my phone buzzed softly against the couch cushion. Mom. I stared at the screen for several seconds before answering. Not because I wanted reconciliation, because avoidance no longer felt necessary. Hello. At first, all I heard was breathing. Then my mother spoke quietly. For the first time in my life, she sounded old. Hi, Emily. I waited. No accusation came. No manipulation. Just silence stretching carefully between us. Finally, she said, I heard about your promotion. Thank you. Another pause. Then softly, your father saw the photos online. I looked toward the rain sliding down the massive windows facing the ocean. How is he tired? I almost said, aren't we all? Instead, I remained quiet. Then my mother surprised me again. We should have been proud of you. The words hit harder than yelling ever could have. Not because they fixed anything. Because they arrived 30 years too late. I closed my eyes briefly. Outside waves crashed against the rocks below the cliffs. You hurt me, I said quietly. I know. No, I replied softly. I don't think you do. Silence again. Then came the sound of her crying very quietly into the phone. Not dramatic crying, not performative, just tired grief. And for the first time I realized something difficult. My mother had spent her whole life needing control because she never learned how to feel secure without it. That didn't excuse what she did. But understanding somebody's damage and excusing it are two different things. I used to think she whispered that if my children looked successful, then maybe people would respect me. I leaned back slowly against the couch. And Ryan needed saving, she continued. You never did. There it was. The truth underneath everything. Strong children often receive the least care because everyone assumes they'll survive anyway. And eventually survival becomes loneliness. I'm sorry, she whispered. The old version of me had dreamed about hearing those words for years. But now they simply sounded sad. Not victorious, not healing, just sad. We spoke for less than 10 minutes. No dramatic reconciliation happened. No sudden emotional breakthrough. Some damage settles too deeply into the foundation of a family to disappear through one conversation. Before hanging up, my mother asked quietly, Do you think we could ever start over? I looked out at the dark Pacific stretching endlessly beyond the windows. Then I answered honestly, I think we can stop hurting each other. That was the closest thing to hope I could offer. A few days later, I arranged something through Aunt Diane anonymously. First month's rent for my parents' apartment. Basic furniture, groceries, nothing extravagant. Just enough to stabilize them. I didn't include a note. I didn't want gratitude. And I didn't want control. I simply no longer needed revenge to feel whole. That's the strange thing nobody tells you about healing. Eventually, the fantasy of winning stops mattering. Peace becomes enough. On New Year's morning, I walked barefoot along the beach just after sunrise. The sky glowed pale gold over the Pacific while cold water curled around my ankles. The world felt quiet, clean. My phone buzzed once inside my coat pocket. Mom. I looked at the screen for a long moment while waves rolled gently across the sand. Then I slipped the phone back into my pocket without answering. Not out of anger, not punishment, just understanding. Some relationships only survive through distance. And maybe that was okay. I stood there watching the horizon brighten slowly while seabirds drifted above the water. The day my parents threw me out of their house was the day I finally walked into my own life. If this story touched you in any way, I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Have you ever had to walk away from people you loved just to protect your peace? And where are you watching from today? We share stories like this every day, stories about family survival, strength, and second chances. So make sure to subscribe and stay with us for the next journey.